Three young singers who soared to the heights of show business on the current rock and roll craze were killed today in the crash of a light plane in an Iowa snow flurry. The singers were identified as Ritchie Valens, 17, Buddy Holly, 22, and J.P.
The roar of the crowd still echoed in Ritchie Valens' ears as he stepped off the stage of the Surf Ballroom in Clear Lake, Iowa. His pulse was racing, partly from the energy of the performance, partly from the weight of the night. He had just closed his set, the last one he would ever play. Inside a small backstage room, Buddy Holly leaned against the wall, chatting with Waylon, Jennings, and Tommy Allsup. Outside, the Iowa winter howled, the air biting and unforgiving. The battered old tour bus that had left them shivering for weeks sat waiting in the parking lot. But for Holly, Jennings, and Allsup, there was another plan. A small charter plane that would take them ahead to their next stop in Minnesota. No more frostbitten miles, no more sleepless nights on the road. Valens, just 17 and already a rising star, rubbed his hands together for warmth and turned to Allsup. "Man, I need a seat on that plane," he said with a grin. Allsup shrugged. "You want to flip for it?" Ritchie fished a coin from his pocket, held it up between his fingers and called, "Heads!" The coin arced through the air, flashing under the dim backstage lights, then landed in Allsup's palm. Heads. Valens grinned, clapping him on the back. "Guess I'm flying." Waylon Jennings had given up his seat too. The big bopper had been feeling sick, and Jennings, looking out for his friend, let him take his place. Before long, Holly, Valens, and Richardson climbed into Carol Anderson's car, bound for the Mason City airport. The headlights cut through the falling snow as they pulled onto the quiet road, slowly fading out of sight to those still at the Surf Ballroom. Of the four men in that car, only Carol would see the morning. In the late 1950s, rock and roll was on fire, fueled by young talents whose sounds would shape music history. But in a cruel twist of fate, three of its rising stars were taken too soon. At the forefront of this tragic loss was Buddy Holly. Born Charles Hardin Holly in Lubbock, Texas in 1936, he grew up surrounded by music. In this musical environment, he quickly picked up the guitar and discovered his talent for songwriting. By his teenage years, Holly was performing country and western tunes on local radio, but it was the influence of Elvis Presley's rock and roll that shifted his sound. This shift in style led to a contract with Decca Records and later the formation of the Crickets. In 1957, with That'll Be the Day, Buddy Holly shot to national fame. What followed was a whirlwind, chart-topping hits like Peggy Sue, Oh Boy, and Rave On, songs that would define an era. Unlike many rock stars of his time, Holly was more than just a singer. He was an innovator, pioneering double tracking, a technique that layered multiple takes of his voice to create a richer sound. He also helped establish the now standard rock band setup of two guitars, bass, and drums. But by early 1959, tensions with his manager left him in financial trouble. Determined to keep touring, Holly joined the Winter Dance Party Tour, his last. While Holly was transforming the sound of rock and roll, a young artist on the West Coast was blending the genre with his own cultural heritage. Ritchie Valens blended rock with Latin rhythms, introducing fresh cultural influences that would leave a lasting impact on the genre. Born Richard Stephen Valenzuela in 1941 in California's San Fernando Valley, Ritchie Valens grew up surrounded by the rich musical traditions of his Mexican-American heritage. He taught himself guitar and was playing in a high school band when a local producer discovered him. Renamed Ritchie Valens, he was just 17 when his first recordings hit the airwaves. Come On, Let's Go showcased his raw energy, but it was Donna, a heartfelt ballad written for his high school sweetheart, and La Bamba, a high-energy rock adaptation of a traditional Mexican folk song that made him a national sensation. Valens' fusion of rock and roll with Latin rhythms was groundbreaking. He was on the brink of something huge, with offers pouring in and his influence already shaping what would later be known as Chicano rock. The last musician in our story is the Big Bopper, known to be a real showman at heart. Born Giles Perry Richardson Jr. in Texas in 1930, he first made a name for himself as a radio DJ, known for his energetic personality and deep, booming voice. His breakthrough came in 1958 with Chantilly Lace, a flirtatious rock and roll anthem that quickly climbed the charts. Unlike Holly and Valens, the Big Bopper's strength lay not in intricate musicianship, but in his larger-than-life presence and infectious energy. His booming voice, charismatic stage presence, and knack for crafting infectious hooks helped shape the fun, radio-friendly side of early rock and roll. He had also started writing hits for other artists and was poised to expand his career into television. In late January 1959, the Winter Dance Party Tour hit the road, bringing Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, the Big Bopper, and other rising rock and roll acts to eager Midwest audiences. Night after night, they traveled to venues across Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa, often in punishing sub-zero temperatures. The tour roster shifted slightly as it progressed, but it consistently featured these three headliners, accompanied at times by Dion and the Belmonts. Grueling as the nightly performances were, the relentless tour schedule was made even worse by frequent bus breakdowns, often leaving the musicians stranded in the freezing cold. Conditions became so severe that Carl Bunch, Holly's drummer, was briefly hospitalized with frostbite after a bus malfunction forced everyone off into the bitter night. Despite these setbacks, the show had to go on. The tour scrambled for replacement vehicles, sometimes forcing the musicians to split up and find whatever transportation was available. Eventually, the caravan arrived at the Surf Ballroom in Clear Lake, Iowa on February 2nd. The Surf Ballroom was known for its spacious dance floor and polished acoustics, a favorite stop for touring artists. Though the weather outside was harsh, the crowd inside was enthusiastic. Holly, Valens, and Richardson each played energetic sets with fan favorites like That'll Be the Day and La Bamba drawing cheers. The decision to charter a small plane stemmed from the ongoing bus problems and the desperate need for rest before the next engagement. Holly, desperate for a break from the brutal conditions, arranged for a small plane to take them to Fargo. It was supposed to be an escape from the grueling tour, but instead it became one of rock and roll's greatest tragedies. After wrapping up their set at the Surf Ballroom in Clear Lake, Iowa, Buddy Holly's plan was to fly ahead to Fargo for some much-needed rest. Ritchie Valens would secure his spot through a fateful coin toss with guitarist Tommy Allsup. Waylon Jennings, who had originally intended to fly, ceded his seat to J.P. Richardson, who had been battling the flu. Shortly after midnight, the musicians were driven the short distance from the Surf Ballroom to nearby Mason City Municipal Airport by the ballroom's manager. Waiting there was a single-engine Beechcraft Bonanza belonging to Dwyer Flying Services. The group's intended route would take them north into Minnesota and onward, helping Holly and his bandmates stay ahead of a grueling winter tour schedule. What was meant to be a quick flight was already threatened by worsening weather. Roger Peterson, the 21-year-old pilot, had grown up not far from Clear Lake. Described by friends as meticulous and disciplined, he earned his private license as a teenager and quickly built flying hours, enough to hold a commercial license and flight instructor credentials. However, he was only partially trained on flying solely by instruments, which posed a challenge on a dark, snowy night. Still, he was regarded locally as reliable, and the owner of Dwyer Flying Service, Jerry Dwyer, trusted him with charters. The flight lifted off around 12:55 a.m., executing a smooth takeoff before banking left in a sweeping 180-degree turn. Climbing to 800 feet, the aircraft passed east of the airport, then veered northwest along its intended course. From his perch outside the Mason City Airport control tower, Jerry Dwyer tracked the plane's progress. The red glow of its tail light remained visible, a steady beacon in the night. Then, as the aircraft reached 5 miles out, the light began to sink, slow at first, then vanishing entirely. The passengers inside the plane looked out as the ground slowly faded away. Once the novelty of this experience began to wear off, the three musicians started settling in for the short flight. Suddenly, a tension crept into the cabin as the pilot's eyes darted between instruments, his movements growing more urgent. Then, out of nowhere, Buddy Holly saw the Earth rapidly coming up out of the clouds. In an instant, reality blurred. The Earth rushed up to meet them, and then silence. When dawn arrived and there was still no sign of the plane, search efforts began. It wasn't long before wreckage was discovered in a cornfield, only a few miles from the airport runway. All four aboard had perished on impact. As news broke, fans and fellow performers were stunned. The tragedy sent shockwaves through the rock and roll world, a stark reminder of how fleeting both fame and life can be. In the ensuing investigation, the Civil Aeronautics Board concluded that pilot error combined with the adverse weather led to the crash. Few headlines acknowledged Peterson beyond blaming him, but those closest to him remembered a careful flyer caught in circumstances beyond his training. Thank you so much for sticking around until the end of the video. If you found this story interesting and want to explore other historical people, places, and events, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. I'd also love to hear from you. Drop a comment below telling me which topics you'd like me to cover in future episodes. I'm trying to build a community around these videos, so any thoughts on topics or ways to improve the videos are more than welcome. Your support makes this channel possible, and I'm so excited to continue sharing incredible stories with you.